Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Blender Introduction and Applications, a GAMERella workshop. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities to examine research questions and projects in development here at the university. We are running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting, so for those of you joining us there, we welcome your comments and questions with a raised hand or via the chat. And for those of you in the space, if you'd like to participate, just let us know by raising a hand and we'll be sure to get a microphone to you. With that, it is now my pleasure to pass the mic over to your workshop facilitator today and co-organizer of GAMERella, Owen Hellum. Owen?
Can you hear me? Good. Hi, I'm Owen. I'm a co-organizer of GAMERella, and I'm the workshop organizer for GAMERella 2024 this year. Before I start talking about Blender stuff, I have a little spiel about GAMERella. For those that are not aware, GAMERella is the world's longest running annual game jam and workshop series like this that focuses on supporting aspiring and emerging game creators from equity-deserving backgrounds. Dissatisfied originally with the game spaces and opportunities provided for women in Montreal's game scene, Gina Hara and Charlotte Fisher created GAMERella in 2013. That's over 10 years ago now. Since then, GAMERella has welcomed over 1,100 participants in a low-stress, learner-friendly environment. GAMERella participants have come a long way over the years, founded over a dozen game studios, went to study games, became professional freelancers, got hired by many AAA studios, and even came back to GAMERella to teach, mentor, and become organizers. I myself am an example of this. I'm an organizer of GAMERella. I'm a mentor. I mentor on the day of the actual jam, and I'm helping organize these workshops. I'm working in the industry now, and GAMERella was my first game jam, so that's pretty cool. I have a bit of a cold today, so I'll be trying not to cough too much, but there might be some in there. So today's workshop is Blender. And this is a subject that I really love. I hold near and dear to my heart. I started learning Blender in high school and have really sort of not stopped since. Let me share my screen so we can you can see what's going on. I'll be sort of, hopefully, yeah, that's hidden. Good, okay. I'll be sort of referencing some notes as we go along here, and I will provide those notes on the GAMERella webpage for this event afterwards. So you'll have access to all my notes and all the many shortcuts that Blender has. Cool. So for those that are not don't have Blender already on their computers, you can download it from blender.org/download. You can get the most recent version from there. The most recent version is 4.2.3. At least that was the version I downloaded a couple days ago. You can also get it from Steam, but I personally recommend downloading it directly from the source because then you don't have to have Steam running when you have Blender running. It's pretty simple. I also recommend having a 3-button mouse if you can. This will help things out a lot when you're modeling. And I'll be using a 3-button mouse in this tutorial. You can use Blender without it, but it's highly recommended. Using it with a trackpad is a little difficult. Fantastic. So I've opened up Blender here, completely blank new scene, new install and everything. And before I do anything, I'm going to set a few settings because on a laptop, there's a few settings to make Blender sort of work for you. First of all, so I can go up to File here. You can ignore all, I know it looks very intimidating, all these windows and widgets and stuff, but the aim of this workshop is going to be to sort of say, here's what you can pay attention to as a beginner, and here's what you don't have to pay attention to. So the settings are up here. You go to Edit, Preferences, and there's a huge, big set of settings here. But if we go into Input here, we want to have Emulate Numpad checked on. That's for laptops. If you have a desktop computer, you don't need to have this on, but Emulate Numpad essentially turns the top row of number keys into keys that we can press to orient our view in the scene. That's the first one. Next, in settings, I like to go to Key Map, and I'd like to make sure that Select with Mouse button is on left rather than right. Historically, Blender has been select with right, but for a long time now, they've the standard is select with left, so they've switched to that. I just like to make sure that it's on left there. And lastly, right underneath here, there's something that says spacebar action. Sometimes it's set to play by default. I like to have it on search. Blender has a bajillion little things that you can do to modify vertices and pull stuff around. It has a lot of little tools and stuff, little functions that you can perform, and it can be kind of maddening to search for those. So I like to have it on spacebar action on search so that when I'm in the scene, I can just press search and it brings up a search bar of all the actions I can take. If it was on play, it would play the animation timeline down here, but we're not going to be covering animation. And that's actually a good segue. Today, we're going to be covering a lot of things. I'm going to try and sort of blast through a lot of stuff. But the things we'll not be covering are animation and exporting an animation. We're not going to be covering rigging either. But we're going to be covering pretty much everything else. The idea for this workshop is to get you to have sort of like a basic understanding of all the major functions of Blender, with the goal to export this for a game engine such as Unity or Unreal. And in fact, we have another workshop later today where you can take this model that you make today and actually put it into the Unreal Engine, which is pretty cool. And it also, the idea for this is that during the, say for example, during our game jam later this month, you might be able to use these skills to make art for a game. Alrighty, so that's enough talk. Let's start talking about Blender itself. So as you can see here, Blender has a lot of these windows. It's sort of a big boxy windowy interface. And what's great about Blender is that they're all totally customizable. So you can stretch them far and wide, up and down like this. You can even change them. So I can change this one to say an outliner, like one over here. I'll explain what these are in just a sec. But you can really sort of customize what each of these windows look like. The default setup with the 3D viewport here, what's this one called? I have my zoom thing in the way. The outliner up top here, the properties panel here, and the timeline down here is a pretty standard setup, and it's a good one. I'm not going to really change it for what I'm going to be doing today. You can change this to customize it to your preferences, but I like to leave it as is. Let's go through these four main windows. So number one is the 3D viewport. This is pretty standard. It shows you your 3D objects in the scene. It shows you them and you can reposition them and move them around. We're going to talk about that all in a second. I would say 90% of what we're going to be doing in Blender is going to be in this window. After that, we have the outliner window. This shows you all the objects in your scene. So currently we have a cube, we have a light, and we have a camera. This is contained within a collection. A collection is just a group. Like any other software where you need to group objects, it's just got a group of them. You don't have to use collections, but they're really useful. Next, the properties window. We'll get to this later in the workshop, but this contains a lot of modifiers and textures and stuff that you will be applying to any of the objects in your 3D view. It's ways to modify your objects, modify rendering. It's a settings. It's a section of a bunch of settings. You can ignore the timeline down here because we're not going to be covering animation today, but it is down. It is down here. If at any point you want to close any of these windows, you can, but I will warn you, Blender's sort of interaction for creating new windows and removing them can be a little finicky. You'll notice that when you hover in the intersections between these sort of square windows, these rectangular windows, your mouse should turn into a little cross icon. When that appears, if you click and drag, it'll split it. And so you can create a really customized setup, which is awesome. But now what if you want to close that? My recommendation is you click and then where that little plus is, make a little circle, and then you can sort of slot it in. But you can see it doesn't behave perfectly. So you have to be kind of finicky with it. See, and sometimes like that, you will accidentally open a window. So I don't recommend doing too much of that. But if you wanted a more customized setup, you can add new windows in. Fantastic. So Like I said, we're going to be doing most of our navigating and our operating and our editing in the 3D window here. So there are a few ways that we navigate in here. So this is why a 3-button mouse is really useful. We can use the middle mouse button, click and pan, and move your mouse to rotate in the scene. It rotates about that cube in the center there, and it has full 360-degree movement or rotation. If we want to pan side to side, all we have to do is hold down Shift while we press the middle button to pan left and right. So without the Shift, it's rotation. With the Shift, it's panning. And you'll notice that as I pan, I'm actually sort of changing the center of my rotation. So if I pan it to the left here and then I rotate, I'm now rotating around like this imaginary point over here. But let's keep it in the middle for right now. So pretty much the middle click and the Shift is all you need to navigate a scene. Lastly, you can scroll the middle mouse wheel to zoom. That's also pretty standard. So between Shift, scrolling, and middle mouse click, you can pretty much navigate wherever you want in the entire scene. Not mastering, but getting familiar with this is a pretty fundamental way to use Blender. And I'm just remembering now that I want to turn on my keys here so that you can all see what I'm doing. So that will hopefully be helpful, so you can sort of see what I do as I'm inputting it. Great. Lastly, for navigation, and this is why using the emulate numpad keys is really useful, is that I can press the number 1 key to snap to the front of the object, the 3 key to snap to the side, and the 7 key to snap to the top. So this is, I personally use the 1, 3, and 7 keys like all the time. So I'm editing, I'm doing some modifications, I'm in over here, okay, let's look to the right and pan over here. Then I want to move to the top and I want to zoom out and pan over here. And so between panning, scrolling, rotating, and pressing these 1, 3, and 7 keys, that's the bulk of the navigation that you'll use in Blender. And because it's a 3D thing that you're going to be creating, you're going to want to be looking at it constantly from all angles. Let's say you wanted to look at the object from the other side. So say, for example, rather than pressing 1 to see the face, I would like to see the back. I can hold down Command, or on a Mac, I think it's Control, and press that same number, so in this case 1, to view the back of the object. So 1 to view the front, Command 1 to view the back. 3 to view the left, Command 3 to view the right. 7 for the top, and Command 7 for the bottom. It's just a cube, so you don't really see the difference, but that can be helpful. Mostly you really just need 1, 3, and 7, but sometimes you'll need the other ones. Fantastic. So that's Windows and navigation. As a reminder, I will have all of these key maps and numbers and stuff in a document, which I'll put on the GAMERella website on the page for this event afterwards. But yeah, from here it's going to get a lot more complex with more inputs. So let's talk about actually transforming these 3D objects in the scene and actually modifying them. Because that's what we're going to be doing and with objects, is modifying them. So as I mentioned before briefly, left click is to select. So I can either click off this object or click on it to select it. Objects have this sort of yellow, orangey outline around them. I can also select the light here or the camera. If you want to select all objects, you hit A. If you want to deselect all objects, you hit A again. You hit A twice, double A. That'll be in the document. So the 3 main sort of ways that we're going to transform objects are going to be translations, rotations, and scaling. So I can select my object that I want to transform. And if I want to translate it, that is move it in space, I press G. G stands for grab. And I can press G and just grab it and pull it around wherever I want. I can look at it from another angle. For example, over here, press G and grab it and pull it that way. So we've done that. I'm going to Command Z to undo that. So that's translation. I can rotate it as well. So if I press R for rotate, I can rotate it. Press 1 here, R, rotate it, 360 degrees, whatever. And lastly, I can scale it. So I can press S and that scales it up, or I can scale it down. I can scale it, yeah. Scaling It's pretty simple. So grabbing, rotating, and scaling are the three main fundamental things you're going to be doing a lot of the time when you're manipulating objects. This is across all 3D platforms. This is standard. But with Blender, you're going to want to be doing more complex transformations on objects more than just grabbing them by a certain amount, rotating them by a certain amount, or scaling them by a certain amount. So let's talk about some ways that we can sort of modify these transforms. So let's say, for example, I want to grab this, but I move my mouse and it shoots way off the screen. Okay, well, that's not good. If I want to grab it by just a little bit, I can hold down Shift as I grab, and the sensitivity sort of goes down. Like it only grabs it by a little bit. It's a little technique that I like to share. Conversely, if you want to grab something and snap it as you grab it, you can hold down the, on Mac, it's the Control key. I don't know what it is on Windows. It might be a similar key, I'm not sure. But if I'm holding down the Control key and grabbing, you can see it sort of like jitters, it snaps into place. And this is useful if you want to align it to a grid. I use Control quite often. Control also works for rotation. So let's go to the top view here with 7. I'll press R to rotate it, and I'll hold down Control, and I can rotate it in increments here. So if I want to rotate it to a perfect 45 degrees, I can do it like that by holding down Control. That's pretty cool. I can also, of course, do that with scale. What's next? Yes. If we want to, rather than, let's say I wanted to grab a thing, and I wanted to grab it up, but I don't want to hit one, grab, and then sort of align it up, or maybe hold down Control and get it in place, because that can be tedious and finicky. What I can do is I can hit grab, and then I can type an axis afterwards. So X, you can see it sort of drew the little line there. X and Y are the ground planes. X is right and left, Y is back and forward and back, and Z is upwards. So what I can do, for example, is I can go grab Z, and then it only grabs it along the Z axis. Or I want to scale it only along the X axis, and then it scales only along the X axis. This is, again, so a transform key, so G, R, or S, plus X, Y, or Z will allow you to transform it, translate it in that particular axis. This, of course, works like this too. I can only rotate it one. So that's pretty cool. I use that very often. You can use that with, so this is grab Z. You can use that with the Control key as well. So I can do that, the snapping in that axis as well, which is pretty cool. We can add even more keys onto this little string that we're building here. So let's say, in this previous example, I hit R to rotate, and I held Control, and I rotated it to exactly 45 degrees. Well, what if I just want to rotate it to it without having to move my mouse at all? I can hit R for rotate, Z for the vertical axis, and then I can just type 45, and it rotates it 45 degrees. So typing in a number after you've typed in a transform will transform it by that amount. So I can say, for example, scale it along the x-axis times 2. So it'll double the width of this cube. So again, that's scale along the x-axis by 2. Right. Lastly, say, for example, we wanted to scale along the x and y axes at the same time. So that's we want to make it wider, but not any taller. I can do scale, and I'm going to go Shift Z, meaning scale along everything that's opposite the Z axis, and then by 5, let's say. So now we've made a platform, right? This is, once you get the sort of understanding of these things down, it really helps to speed up workflows. You don't have to use this. Like, I didn't have to do that. I could do scale X 5, scale Y, scale X by 5, scale Y by 5, and I have the same result. But if I wanted to scale, if I wanted to do it in a different way, I can just do scale Shift Z 5. It's it's just a different way to do it, and it's a little bit of a faster way to do it. So let me review all these things. So we've got grab to translate, R to rotate, S to scale. And those are dependent on the context in which we're looking in. So if I'm looking from the side and I hit scale, if I hit side and I hit grab, it only grabs along this axis. It doesn't actually grab it on any others. We can hold down the control key as I grab something to snap it. I mean, this also works for scaling or rotating. I can hold down shift and only do it a little bit. I can say grab it along the x-axis by 1, so I can provide it an axis and an amount. Also, if you hit backspace, it'll undo the number that you put in, or it'll backspace the number. And if I do grab shift or scale shift Z by holding on shift, I sort of mirror the axes upon which I'm performing this transformation, hit a number, and we can do it like that. So these are some really useful tools that help you to manipulate these objects. Again, all of these will be in the document I have. These also apply to edit mode. Edit mode is something we're going to get into later, but edit mode allows us to modify the vertices within this object so that we're not just constantly manipulating a cube, we can be manipulating an arbitrary object. And these sort of scaling, rotating, and translating operations also carry forward into, the keys carry forward into edit mode. Before we start editing objects on a more granular level, let's talk about how we're going to actually be adding objects, deleting objects, and moving them around. So we've done operations with just one, but let's say we want to get rid of that object. It's pretty simple. We just hit X and then return or click delete. That gets rid of the object. For right now, I'm also going to get rid of this light and this camera because we don't need to care about them right now. They're just cluttering up our scene. And now we've got a blank, totally empty project. Let's say we want the cube back. We hit Shift A and this menu comes up. Now, this is a lot of different things that are pretty technical looking. We can ignore pretty much all of these. We're going to get to lights and cameras later, but you can pretty much ignore everything except for mesh right now. And so if I go Shift A, go down to mesh, I can select one of these sort of prefab objects in here. If I want the cube back, I can click on cube, of course. X to delete it, or I can go plane. A plane obviously is a 2D square, but we've got a few others. We've got circles, just an empty circle. We've got a sphere. We've got an icosphere, which is essentially it's a polyhedron sphere made up of triangles. We have cylinders, a cone, and torus, which is a mathematical term for essentially a donut shape. Lastly, we have the Suzanne monkey. This is included in all versions of Blender, and it's used as a test object, often for lighting or for rendering. It's a fun one. For right now, we can just go and just put our cube back in there. And we can even add more objects. Like if I have a cube here, I can go add me a sphere, grab it by Z up. Grab it along the Z-axis like that, and give me a cylinder, grab it, scale it down, grab it here, and then do, I don't know, and we're building a little snowman or something like that. Obviously, this is not the optimal way to model, but you can add objects in super duper quickly like this, and just get them snapped in. So I'm gonna get rid of these because we're gonna do a little bit more of a intelligent way to model. So. What's next? Yes, so Shift A to create, Shift D to duplicate, and I can just hit Shift D and then duplicate my object like that, or I can do Shift D, say for example along the X-axis. Now I'm only duplicating along the X-axis like that. Duplicate, Shift D for duplicate is it's quite useful. I use it a lot. How's everybody feeling? Am I going too fast? Maybe show a thumbs up. I can slow down. We're good? Okay. If you want to join objects. So right now, I've created two cubes here, but you can see when I click on them, they're separate objects. If I try to grab this one, it won't grab the other one. If I want them to be the same object, I got to hold down Shift, select both of them, and I can go, I think is it Control? What is it? Yeah, it's Control J. On Mac, it's Control J. I would assume, I'm not sure what it is on PC, but on Mac, it's Control J to join those two objects. So now you can see here in the outliner here, they've combined into a single cube. And if I rotate them, it rotates both of them at the same time. That's joining objects. Like I said before, if you press A, it selects everything, and double press A, it deselects everything. If you ever want to hide an object, so let's get rid of this one and put a cube back here. And let's say I have our little example before where we're making a little model here and we want to check out what it looks like on the underside of the sphere, but oh no, it's intersecting with the cube. I can click on the cube and press the H key and it'll hide it. And you can see up here in the outliner that the cube has actually been hidden with that little eyeball icon closed. We can turn it on and off this way too. Pressing H in the scene is functionally identical to turning it on and off here in the outliner. If you want to quickly return all objects back to the scene, you can press, I think it's Control H. No, hold on. Option H. I think on Mac, on Windows, it is Alt H. You can press, yeah, so it's Option H to bring everything back in. Great, that's that. I often will, when I'm modeling, I'll be modeling one thing, and then what I'll do is I'll sort of like hide everything else, do some fiddling on this one section of the model, and then Alt H to bring everything back together, make sure it looks good. Lastly, before we start talking about edit mode, there are a few ways that we can render objects in the scene between being flat and smooth. This is you don't have to really think too hard about it, but essentially, if you want your object to feel smooth, you can right-click on it, and go to Shade Smooth, and it'll make it look smooth. Obviously, the edges will still have these bumps on them, but it essentially says everything that is that you're seeing flat on will look smooth. This doesn't work for cubes. I mean, it kind of does, but it looks pretty weird. Not recommended for cubes. Anything that you feel should look smooth, I recommend right-click and Shade Smooth. We'll get to this later, but it's just different ways to render an object. Lastly, before we start getting into edit mode, there is an important property of all 3D objects, no matter what platform you're using, that is called the origin. An origin of an object is, in Blender, is that little orange dot. It represents the sort of computational center of your object. It's not the actual physical center, obviously. Well, in this case it is. Most cases it looks like it is, but you can actually modify the place of where that origin is. And for 3D modeling, especially if you're sending it to a game engine, you always want the origin to be at the bottom of your object, the foot of your object. So in this case, this is not good because the axis here represents the green and orange axis, the red and green axes here represent sort of the floor of the world. And so we want that origin, well, we want it to be at the bottom of the foot, but also at the bottom of the world. So I can grab by Z and pull it up like that, but now it's sitting on the floor, but now the origin isn't at the bottom. And the reason that this matters is because scaling is respective to the origin. So if I was to hit scale here, it scales with respect to the origin, not with respect to the floor of the world. Excuse me. So when we take this into a game engine and say, for example, we export it, but in the game engine, we want to scale our character a little bit bigger, or we make a couch and we want the couch to be used for a larger character. We want to be able to scale it. But if our origin is at the center, like if it's in the center here, and this is our couch, and we take it into Unreal and we scale it, it'll scale above, but it'll also scale below. And we don't want that because then we have objects intersecting with each other and we have polygons going everywhere. It's not great. So we want both the origin at the bottom and the foot of the object at the bottom. But how do we do that? Enter edit mode. Edit mode is, like I said before, it's a way to edit the individual vertices of an object in an arbitrary way, as such, to create unique and arbitrary models. And we can use it in conjunction with the origin to place the origin at the bottom. So in Blender, you can press with your mouse in the object view here, the 3D view here, you can press Tab. And Tab will toggle into edit mode. You know that you're in edit mode when you see the object has these little dots at the corners of it, and the sort of like lines, and it'll generally be orange. I can deselect it and it won't be orange anymore, but you can see these sort of dots, and that represents edit mode. Also, it says it up here. So let's say we want the vertices of the object to be above the floor, but we want the origin, this little dot in the middle, to stay on the floor. What we can do is we can use those same translation tools that we used before, G, to actually move just the vertices, but not the whole object. So let's press G, Z, and I'm going to press type 1. So it moves all these vertices of the cube up by 1, but you can see it didn't move the origin. If we press Tab to go back to object mode, we can now see that this object is sitting on the floor properly. And if we scale it, it'll scale along the floor, but it won't scale below the floor. That's what we want. At this point, I'm going to recommend everybody to save your work. So Command S, I'm going to save it to my desktop. I'm going to call this workshop. Save, and then save. I'm a compulsive saver. So from this point on, you're going to probably be seeing a lot of Command S's in that little log there. Yes, saving your work is great. If at any point Blender crashes, it does not crash often, but if it does, you can go to File, Recover, Autosave. And this will bring up a list of autosaves here, and you can go back. It has saved me a couple times. Oh, you can't see it there. That's a shame. But if you go to File, Recover, Autosave, it'll bring up an autosave, and they're usually quite accurate. So I recommend that. Great. Okay, so we were starting to talk about edit mode. So yeah, we can press Tab to go in and out of edit mode. So whether when we're out of edit mode and object mode, and we perform a transformation, we're transforming the whole object. But in edit mode, I can select just one vertice, and I can grab that vertice and I can drag it up and around. So you think of edit mode as a more granular individual vertice manipulating mode, rather than object mode is manipulating the whole object all at the same time. In 3D modeling software and 3D platforms and rendering as a whole, we have 3 different kinds of things that make up an object. We have vertices, that's the individual points that are that make up the points of the object. We've got edges, which are the lines between vertices, and you can press Shift and to select multiple vertices at the same time. So that's an edge. And we've got faces. Faces are the flat areas of our object, like so. If in edit mode you want to select these things individually, you can go to, so we're in vertex select mode right now, but we can go to edge select, and then I can select individual edges. Or we can go to face select, and I can select individual faces. I find that swapping between face select and vertice select to be the most common thing that I do. Edge select sometimes, but most of the time it's vertice or face select. So let's say, I don't know, we wanted to make this taller. So let's select the top face, grab up, and then we want to scale it in. And hey, we're making a pyramid. Look at that. That's pretty cool. And then, I don't know, we want to grab it and then rotate it and grab it again, and then look over here from the top, rotate it, grab it here. So this can all be done with just the things that you guys have learned so far, which is pretty cool. And we don't even have to have it keep its cube shape. Like we can make it really super weird looking, like that. I mean, we're starting to get some weird tearing between vertices here, and you want to generally avoid that. When it starts to look like from one side to the other, like it shouldn't really be physically possible, that's a suggestion that things are starting to go wrong. So I'm gonna undo all these changes here, bring it back to our cube, go back to vertex select. What's next here? Yes, so and like I said, we can transform any of these vertices you can transform whole edges, or you can transform whole faces. It's all super, super editable. That's the basics of edit mode. But most of what we're going to be doing today is in edit mode, and we need to do a lot more than that. We need to extrude faces, we need to join faces, we need to create whole new ones, we need to duplicate objects, and we're going to do a lot. So let's start breaking this cube apart and learning about all the different things that we can do in edit mode. So first of all, we can delete faces or vertices or edges. So if I select a face here and I press X, just like in object mode, I can choose what to delete. So if I press X, I have the option to delete vertices, edges, or faces. So if I delete vertices, it deletes all the vertices contained within that face. So if you remember, there are 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So deleting those 4 vertices gets rid of the top of our cube. But if we just want to get rid of just like the top face of it, we press X, faces. So now it's an empty box. Let's say we want to fill that back in. I select my 4 vertices, and I can press F to fill. F is something you're going to be using quite often. Filling faces in is really quite fundamental. So yeah, you don't have to have all 4 faces though. You can select 3 vertices, all 4 vertices. You can select 3 vertices and press F, and now it only just fills in those 3. And it fills in whatever you've selected. I could select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that's not going to work. I can select those 4 and press F, and now those are filled in. That's pretty cool. What's next? Next up is a shortcut that I use really quite often that I think a lot of people who use Blender don't really use too much. And it's a thing called join. So let me press X here, delete that face there, and then I'm going to fill this face back in, fill the whole thing back in to be our cube. Joining allows you to join 2 vertices together along a face. It is similar to fill, but it cannot fill areas in. It's only used to essentially like draw edges along a plane. So I can select these 2, and what I could do is I could press F to fill them in. But then if I select this face underneath it is actually independent from it. And we kind of don't want that. We want to break this in. We don't want to have just like this random like gross line just sticking there. We want to instead of filling these 2, we want to join them. So if I press J, it looks like it's something similar has happened, but it actually hasn't. If I go back to select the face select and I select here, you can see that it's actually split the face into 2. This is a much more, it's a much better way to model things. You really don't want in your model to have individual like edges just sticking out or within your object. It creates rendering issues and it is not optimized for storing the actual model. So J is best for that. Another super useful tool that I use all the time is something called a loop cut. I can do that by doing Command R on a PC, it's Control R, and that will create a loop cut. You can see it's sort of made a loop around our cube here. We can choose the axis we want it on. Let's put it on that one. And then I can slide it back and forth. I'm going to slide it over here. And you can see now we sort of made a slice into the 3D object. From the inside, it's also, the slice is also there. Sorry. I use this quite often. So let's say, for example, I want to make this half a cube. I want a half a cube. I make a loop cut. I put it right in the middle there. I can select these 4 vertices. And I can press X to delete the vertices. And now we've got half a cube. And it hasn't actually just left us with one plane. It's actually cut it in half. I can do more loop cuts. I can do a loop cut, and then I can do a loop cut. Oops, I can do a loop cut in the middle here, and then another loop cut in there. And I can get super granular with this. Pull this one up here like this. Loop cuts are really useful. Yep, that's loop cuts. Next up, extruding. Extruding is a big thing that is used quite often for 3D modeling. You're going to want your thing to branch out. Maybe you're making a character with arms. Maybe you're making a chair with legs. Maybe you're making a cord and you want to extend the cord out. So let's select a face and we can press E to extrude. And it automatically recognizes the orientation of the face and will try to extrude it along that orientation. In this case, the face is pointing up, so it's going to try and extrude it up. So if I press E and drag up, you can see it's extruded it up and made a sort of like a little compartment up there. I can then select this face and hit E and extrude that out, and select this face and hit E and extrude that out. And now we're really getting somewhere with an object. As before, I can always, just as a reminder, I can always just go in here and grab these, scale these in. I can really modify this as much as I want. It doesn't have to be QB. What I can even do is I can say, for example, do this and hit J. Oops, not that. That was X. That was H to hide it. But I can press J and then make a join between these two. So you can really start to make your object all bumpy and pointy and stuff, and get away from that sort of default cube purgatory. So we've talked before about joining objects, but let's say, for example, we've made this little thing and we want to separate these objects. What I can do is I can click and make this big box X like this to select, and I can select these two as well. Zoom in here. And so now I've sort of selected this front little cone, this sort of nose shape here. I can press P to separate, and I want to separate by selection because I want to separate the specific selection. And now you can see up here, it's a separate object. I'm still in edit mode though for this original object, so I have to press tab to go back out. So now I have I have separate objects, and I can grab these and rotate them and do fancy things with them. You'll notice though that the origin is still, for this object, is still far away from it. That's because in edit mode, when you're in edit mode, you don't move the origin at all. You only move the vertices around the origin. So that's just something to be aware of as you're modeling. You always want the origin to be in the bottom, in the middle, right there. So I'm going to delete this nose thing, go back to here, press tab, go back into edit mode here. One thing that is also useful is something called beveling. Beveling is a way to smooth a pointy edge out. So let's say we've got this edge here, and we want to bevel it. We want to round this corner. We can do Command B, or no, sorry, on Mac it's Control B, and then I can drag out, and it'll bevel it. And I can do my scroll wheel, and that will bevel it and it'll increase sort of the resolution of this bevel. You don't want to go too high because then your computer will start getting mad at you. But what is this here? It's 1, 2, 3, or maybe 5 like that. That looks pretty good. And you can leave it like that. If you want to edit this out after the fact, there's a little drop down here that allows you to modify those after you've made them. But generally, intuition is the best for these kind of things. So we can bevel things like that. That's pretty cool. I'm trying to sort of go through these relatively quickly because we have a lot of them to get through. Cool. So now that we have these sort of tools at our disposal, we have tools for modifying creating objects, moving them around, scaling them, rotating them, deleting vertices, joining vertices, filling in faces, like so. Fill in the faces. What else did we learn? We learned extruding. Oh yes, I'm forgetting one. Extruding. We can start to do some cool things with them. Before we do that, let me show you one more thing. Inset. If you press I, you can inset a face. I find this is going to often be quite useful in conjunction with extrude. So I can inset a face, extrude it. Inset a face, extrude it. And you can create some pretty cool looking things like that. You can inset any face. It doesn't have to even be a square face. So let's say, for example, I delete this vertice, and then I fill this in. I can even inset this triangular face, which is pretty cool, and extrude that out. Okay, that was the last one. So now that we know how to manipulate these things, we can start talking about some more niche ones that can come up and can help you a lot. And then once we've sort of talked about some niche stuff, I'm going to we can start making an actual model, which is pretty cool. Okay, so Blender has a system called quick favorites that allows you to save a lot of these functions for memory. So say, for example, you're like, oh, I don't remember how to extrude this face. The shortcut is E, of course, but if you don't remember, you can press space to search, type extrude, and extrude edges, and it'll even show you E there. And then it'll, E, oops, space extrude. You want to extrude faces, and then like that. But if you don't want to always have to search up extrude each time you do it, you can actually go down to the property that you're searching for here, in this case, extrude faces. I can right click on it and go to this thing that says here, add to quick favorites. So I'm going to click and do that. Then in the scene, rather than typing space, search for extrude, I can press Q. Hold on, let me remove some of these. This is me doing some testing. I can press Q and the extrude faces is already there in my sort of quick menu of preferred tools. So I can click on that and then it'll do the operation. Some of these easier ones like extrude, you can just press the key for because they're super standard. A lot of people use them. But some of the more obscure ones, we're going to add to our quick menu that I personally find that I use a lot that are a little bit harder to search for or don't have a keybind. Dissolve edges. This is a good one. So I'm going to look up dissolve edges. Dissolve edges right here, right click, add to quick favorites. What dissolve edges does is it allows us to delete edges and vertices without breaking our mesh, sort of. So let's say, for example, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have so many little things on this bevel here. This is way too many. I just want a few. I just want a low poly model. I can go to edge select, and I can select this and hold down Shift, select that one, select that one. Oh, there's too many here. Let's delete every other one, let's say, and delete every other one. Then I can press, rather than hitting X, delete edges, which will cause us to have this breakage here. What we can instead do is Q, go to our dissolve edges here, click on dissolve edges, and it'll dissolve those edges. It'll get rid of them while still keeping the face structure. It's one that I use a lot. I like it. Next up, merge at last. Merge. So merge allows us to, merge two vertices or edges or whatever together. I'm going to hold on. Merge. I'm going to select two vertices here, press space and search for merge. Go down to at last, right click, add to quick favorites. So if we select these two vertices and the last one we selected and we press Q and at last, it'll merge the first selected vertice into the last one. We can do this with multiple selected vertices too. So I can click, 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 and I'm going to merge them all to the last vertice that I just selected. So Q, at last. This is not something that is going to be super useful to everybody, but it's one of those things where it can save you in a pinch if you're like, oh, how do I do this operation and I can't get them without doing it manually because it'll take forever for me to do it manually. How do I do this? That's how to do it. Next up, subdivide. Subdivide. Now, this is one that I use all the time. This is a super, super useful operation. So let's say, for example, we want to put a vertice right in the middle here, right in the middle. I could go finicky. I could, extrude this vertice out and put it in here, and then I could delete the one in between. But that's finicky. So why don't we just subdivide, right? Just put one right in the middle. I can go search. I can search subdivide. Right click, add to quick favorites, and then press Q and subdivide. And now we've got a vertice right in the middle. And if I drag that up, you can see it's connected to both of them. What's cool is you can do this with edges too. So I select the top edge, select the bottom edge, Q, subdivide, and bam, it subdivided it right in two like that. This is probably one of the most useful tools that I use. Subdividing is great. I mean, you can achieve a similar thing with loop cut. If you remember before, that's Control R on Mac. You can put a loop cut right in the middle. That's great. But now you've got a loop cut running around your whole object. Maybe you don't want that. So if I just go like this, select the top, select the bottom, Q, subdivide. There we go. Now we've got it subdivided. Last one that I will suggest for quick favorites is going to be one for object mode, actually, rather than edit mode. So let's hit tab to go back to object mode here. We're going to learn about applying transforms. So I'm going to select my object here, spacebar, I'm going to apply, and right click on all transforms, add to quick favorites. And I can press Q, all transforms. That didn't really seem to do anything, but in fact it did. So I'm going to Command Z, undo that. I'm going to press N to open up this menu over here. This menu here shows us some granular information about the location, the rotation, and the scale of the object. So as you can see, if I grab this object along the x-axis, it'll tell me that I've actually moved it along the x-axis there. One thing that's super important when you're exporting 3D models like this, especially to a game engine like Unreal, if you forget to apply your transforms before you export the object, it'll end up being a weirdly scaled, sized object in Unreal. It will also mess up some of the modifiers you might apply to the object. We're going to talk about modifiers later, but modifiers depend on the object being sort of respective to its size. So let's say, for example, we want to scale it along the x-axis. That's great. Maybe we want it to look like that. That's awesome. But if we were to apply a modifier to this, it would not work as intended. So all we have to do is press Q here, all transforms, and you can see that it's snapped it back to 111 in terms of scale here. Essentially, that you can think of this as applying transforms says, rather than it being a 1 by 1 by 1 object that has modifications on it, it is now sort of baked those modifications in, like hard baked them into the object itself and returned its scale to a naturalized 1 by 1 by 1. Really don't worry about it too much. Just at least once before you export, hit Q, all transforms. Really, you should be doing it like a lot all the time, especially as you're adding new modifiers, so that you don't apply transforms at the end and realize that it's messed up all your modifiers. This is a good thing to know, especially when we're exporting to Unreal or any game engine. Great, so this is hideous, so I'm gonna get rid of that. Press N to hide this menu here. I figure that today, as an example model, let's make a chair. Chairs are pretty standard, chairs are pretty easy. I'm gonna use one of the chairs in the space as a reference. So I'm just gonna pick one of these black chairs that you guys are sitting on. And we can start to use, just based on what we know already, some of the fundamental techniques that we have to make one of these chairs. It's not going to be pretty, but it'll be neat. So let's start by making the seat. The seat has sort of a curvy organic shape to it. So let's start with a cube. Why not? Our cube here, if you remember, the origin should be on the bottom. So let's press Tab, grab Z1, move it up so that the origin is on the floor. Press Tab to go back to edit mode here. And I'm going to press Q, all transforms. You don't have to do that. I'm just compulsive about that. So our chair, the seat of our chair is flat. So we kind of don't want this to be as tall as this is. So let's go scale Z 0.1. I mean, that's a little technical. I can just do scale Z and then like go to an amount that I like. So let's go down like that. It's going to be a pretty flat chair. And I'm looking at the end of it here, the sort of like the part where your legs dangle over, it sort of curves down a little bit. So if I want to curve that down, I'm going to want to select this face and sort of rotate that and grab it down here. But you can see that grabs the whole thing. So we don't want to be doing that. I can do Command R to add a loop cut. And let's put the loop cut right near the end there. One thing that I forgot to mention before is you can press Z. And the only thing you need to worry about right now is solid and wireframe. But if we go to wireframe here, now we see a wireframe version of our object. It allows us to modify things. It helps to see things when we're modeling. And if you want to go back to solid, you just press Z, solid. For right now, don't try out rendered or material preview. It'll make your computer be slow for a sec. So I'm just going to go to wireframe here. Press 3 to go to the side, select, and in wireframe mode, if you select vertices, it'll select the ones behind them as well. So do that. I'm going to rotate this a little bit and grab it down, rotate this, position it a little bit, and you can sort of see now, if we go back to solid, we've got the edge of our chair sort of sloping down a little bit. It doesn't look great, but whatever. I'm going to go back to Z wireframe mode. I'm going to put another loop cut around here. Let's put it right there. And now we're going to do the back of the chair. So I can select this, which is select these, and I can extrude that upwards to form the back of our chair. I can rotate this down, grab it, pull it into place a little bit. In the back of the chair, it sort of goes up and then it sort of curves out a little bit. So we're going to extrude that out like that. It's starting to look chair-ish, we're getting there. The middle sort of bows in a little bit. So in this case, I'm going to add another loop cut, put it right in the middle there. Go back to wireframe mode here and go to Z to view the top. And I'm going to select just the back ones here. And then I'm going to grab along the y-axis and sort of pull those gently that way to form a curve of the chair. That's coming along. That's starting to look like a chair, sort of. I'm going to remember to press Q and apply all my transforms. Save. Yeah, that's looking like a pretty good seat for right now. I mean, we can do more modifications. We want to get really fancy with this. We could select these the bottom and pull the bottom down a little bit, and maybe we don't want the sides to be so chunky, so we want to pull it in a little bit. We can get more finicky like that, and you at home can get more finicky if you'd like. But I'm going to leave it as it is right now. We didn't have to do all this work. We can use modifiers and modify these objects to generate vertices and generate parts of the mesh that will speed up our workflow. So let's see how we can do that. With an object selected in object mode, you can go on the right here to the properties panel and go down to this little wrench icon, the modifiers panel. Modifiers are incredibly powerful, non-destructive ways of enhancing your workflow, your modeling workflow. I've listed a few in my list here, and I'll sort of go through them. There's not too many that I use, to be honest. If you want to achieve some very specific things like radial symmetry or a corkscrew shape or fancy, skin on characters, you use modifiers. But for a lot of simple modeling, there's really only 3 or 4 modifiers that you use most often. So let's start with the mirror modifier, probably the thing that you will use the most often of any modifiers. You can click on Add Modifier here and you can search, or you can go Generate and go down to Mirror. So that didn't seem like it did anything, but right now it's telling us that it's mirroring along the x-axis. So we've got an object that is on the left and right sides of the x-axis, so we're not going to see this. So let's go into Edit mode, go to Wireframe, and I'm just going to delete all the vertices on this left side of the object here. Press X, delete vertices. Let's go back to solid mode here, and you can see that it's actually mirroring our changes. If we grab this vertice and grab it, it'll actually mirror that change on the other side. If you want to preview what it looks like without the mirroring, you can go over to here to this little, it's like a little icon of a desktop monitor, and click on that, and that will toggle it on and off in the view. And so now all we have to do is model half a chair. We don't have to model a full chair. That saves so much more time for us. And it means that our object is more consistent across the left and right sides. I use mirror modifiers all the time. And what's cool about mirror modifiers is it doesn't have to be just X. It can be Z. I can model it, mirror it like that, and I can mirror it up and down like that. Obviously that doesn't look great, but you can use this to mirror, say for example, you wanted to mirror a sphere. You can just slice the sphere so it's just 1/8 of the full sphere, and then mirror it on the X, Y, and Z, and now you're essentially more than even cubing your workload. Anyway, so we're just going to use the chair to split it in half like so. Great. What other modifiers can we use? Array modifiers. Let's go here. I'm going to search for array. I'm going to give it an array modifier. An array modifier essentially it's a way to duplicate your object. I'm going to scroll down a bit here. So the count here is 2. We can make that count go up. Let's duplicate it 5 times. And then the relative offset here down here tells us we're going to say duplicate by how much each. So in this case, it's duplicating it by 1 each time. So it's creating a chair on the right by 1, by 2, by 3, by 4. We can increase this amount. We can shrink this amount, go into the negatives. We want to generate it the other direction. I'm going to put 1.3, let's say. And then I can even do one this way and generate it off at an angle like that. So let's say we were modeling an auditorium and we wanted a whole bunch of chairs. We can add, I'm going to collapse this one, these 2 arrays. I can add an array going this way, and then I can add another array that, say, instead of continuing going to the right, it's going to go backwards. So 1.5, let's say, and then I set this count like this, and just like that, bam, we have an auditorium. Well, we're missing the bottom of the chair still, but we use modifiers to essentially like exponentially decrease the amount of work that we had to do. And now it's all contained in one single object. So if I hide this object, it hides all the chairs. If you want to make modifications to individual chairs now, say I want to grab this chair and rotate it by a little bit, that you're approaching a destructive workflow territory. So what's cool about modifiers here like this, because they're non-destructive, it's called non-destructive, meaning that you can sort of apply them and you can undo them really quickly. So I can toggle these things on and off. And I haven't actually edited anything with my object yet. I haven't committed anything hard in stone. I can still delete them all I want. But you can't actually apply them because when I go into edit mode, I can't edit any of these other chairs. If I wanted to apply that, I can go on this little drop down here and click apply. And now if I hit tab, you can see now it's applied one of these arrays to it. And if I wanted to say grab one of these chairs, let's select the chair at the back. And then I wanted to grab it, pull it up. Now I can grab that back row. But because we've committed our array, we've sort of brought these vertices into the real world. Now they're committed. And now there's going to be some changes that are not going to be reflected over the whole thing. So generally, you really only want to apply your modifiers at the end if you have to. So I'm going to undo this, bring our array back. That's okay. So that's mirroring and arraying. Another one that I will introduce you to is something called a subdivision modifier. This is a notorious modifier because it's powerful but dangerous if you're not careful about how you use it. So just for demonstration purposes, or not for demonstration, but so you can see what it does, I'm going to add a modifier. I'm going to search for subdivision surface, and add that. And wow, look at that. It smoothed out on all our objects. So essentially what this does is it adds it subdivides like what we did with the quick, the quick favorite. We added the quick favorite subdivide. It subdivides the entire object. It adds subdivisions around the entire object and sort of like squishes it in. This is great because it gives us our chair a more rounded look to it, maybe even a more realistic look. But as you can see, if I put this number up, that looks great. Wow, that chair looks super, super smooth and nice and realistic. And then, but if I hit Z and go to wireframe, or rather, it hasn't applied it yet. If I apply it, hit Z, go to wireframe, oh my goodness, look how many vertices we have. That's not good for your computer. That will slow your computer down quite a lot. So I'm going to undo that. Z back to solid mode here. Generally, you really want to be careful about how many levels you put into the subdivision, because anything higher than 2 or 3 and things will start to get really crunchy. So in fact, I'm going to leave it at 2 here. And if you remember from before, I'm going to right click and shade smooth. Now we have achieved that smooth look and we don't have a whole bunch of really high vertices. So shade smooth and subdivision modifier are like best friends. You can use it because if we turn this off, if we shade smooth but we don't have the subdivision on, it looks gross. But if we have subdivision on, it starts to look quite nice. I would even wager that you don't even really maybe two. Maybe two is looks good. I think one might be too low, but you can sometimes get away with even just one level of subdivision. Cool. So that's a subdivision modifier. Use it wisely, but it's quite powerful. There's also, I'm going to hide these chairs for right now to show off a couple other modifiers. I'm going to add a cube here. There's a bevel modifier you can add. Excuse me. If you remember the bevel modifier before, let's hide this for a sec. The bevel operation, Command B, allowed us to bevel like this. But rather than doing it manually, we can use a modifier to do it ourselves. So we can bevel by a certain amount, by a certain number of segments, and give us a sort of a rounded cube. Again, this will add a lot of vertices really quickly. So right-click Shade Smooth is our best friend here. Cool. So that's a bevel modifier. I'm just going to plug my laptop in because I am low on battery. Have an extension cord maybe that I could get out here. Thank you. And the last modifier that I'm going to show you all is going to be a solidifying modifier. So let's say, for example, we've made a terrain and we've made like, I don't know, actually, let's make a pizza. Made a circle here. I go into edit mode. I fill it in. But we want this pizza to be thick, right? So we can go add modifier. We can go search, solidify. And it doesn't really look like it did anything, but you can change the thickness here and it'll extrude it up. It's essentially an extrusion modifier. But similar to how the bevel modifier bevels your whole object, this thing extrudes your whole object. And it's useful to make a paper thin model have some thickness, some bones to it. Yeah, I will let you all sort of play around with modifiers for a little bit while I get this plugged in. Great, thank you. Yeah. Say that again, sorry? Yeah, sure. So if I want to make like a thick circle, like a cylinder from scratch, I can go Shift A to add a new object, go down to circle here, and it gives us a circle. But if I wanted to have, if I wanted to be an actual filled in circle, I hit Tab to enter edit mode and press F. With all the vertices selected, I press F and it fills in that circle. Then I can press Tab to exit edit mode, go over to the add the modifier, and I'm going to add a solidify modifier, and drag that thickness up. And now we've got a thick circle. The last thing I'm going to talk about for modifiers before I move on is the order of modifiers. The order of modifiers matters a lot. You can see here I've got a sort of stack of modifiers. I've got mirror, a couple of arrays, and then a subdivision. If, for example, I drag the mirror down to the bottom here, whoa, that really breaks things up. At this point, what it's doing is, let's hide these so we can look at the order. It does an array, does another array, it subdivides it, and then it mirrors it. But if you remember, we wanted the mirror to happen first, and then we sort of duplicate the mirror itself. So if you find that you're applying modifiers and it feels kind of weird, or there's some weird seams and stuff, try messing around with the order. Sometimes it'll help. And keep it in mind when you're doing things. Okay, I'm going to very quickly, so we have lighting and texturing and rendering to talk about left. And so I'm going to quickly add some legs to this chair. So I'm going to grab it and pull it up a little bit. I'm just going to grab it, pull it up like so. And then Q, apply transforms. When you apply transforms, it puts the origin at the bottom. So let's pull our chair up like that. I'm going to rename over here. I'm going to rename this seat. And within our collection here, I'm going to add, let's add a cylinder. In the settings for creating a cylinder, I'm going to give it 16 vertices around rather than 32. And we want 4 legs. I'm going to make this a lot simpler than the chair is here, just for time's sake. I'm going to grab, let's go into edit mode, grab Z, grab it up till it's at the top here, scale it like so. I hit, to do that, I hit scale shift Z, so I'm scaling it along the flat plane, scale it to like so. I'm going to grab these top vertices and pull those down till it's in line with the chair. And then I'm going to grab it and put it in the corner there. So I'm making use of the perspectives 1, 3, and 7 quite often. As I'm doing this, I'm making use of wireframe, and I'm sort of panning and looking at around it, how it looks. Go back into solid mode. Yeah, that looks pretty good. In fact, I'm going to scale it in a little bit more. That looks pretty good there. I'm going to also shade this smooth. Yeah, sorry, shade auto smooth sometimes works better for cylinders. And I also want this to be apply to transforms. I want there to be 4 legs. I don't have to model all 4. I can use a mirror modifier. So I'm going to go search for mirror, and it automatically does the X, and we also want the Y. So there we go. There we go. Obviously, this is not duplicating across all the other chairs. In fact, I'm gonna remove the arrays for these other ones, just because we're only just making one chair for right now. So this is how our chair is looking. That's pretty cool. Let's rename this to legs. We're not going to do anything more complex than that right now. There, of course, we could have done a lot of really crazy things with, subdividing and adding more vertices, but I figured that you can take that cheat sheet that I essentially gave, that I ran through when you're making your models, and sort of apply it as those needs arise. I find the best way to learn new keys in Blender, get familiar with them, is just say, okay, I want to make a cupcake. I want to make a vase. I want to make, I don't know, I want to model my phone in Blender. You have a goal in mind and you start going through that. And when you hit a stumbling block, like, oh, I don't know how to make this rounded corner, or, oh, I don't know how to extrude it this way, then you go back to your cheat sheet and you figure out how to do it that way. So that's why I'm not showing all the tools in the modeling of this particular chair. Okay, without further ado, let's start talking about lighting, because we've got a few things to get through. In Blender, as I said before, you can press Z to go into wireframe, but there's a few other ones here as well when you press Z. In our case, we're going to click on rendered. And this is going to make my computer freeze up for a sec, but it'll speed up in just a second. There we go. So now our chair looks kind of gray. Well, it's because there are no lights. The rendered view here shows us what would look like if this was rendered in, like, through an actual camera. And because we have no light, we can't see the chair. So I'm going to add a floor very quickly here. I'm going to go Shift A, mesh cube, not a cube, a plane. I'm going to scale this up by 10. Call this the floor, and remember to Q, apply transforms. Still pretty dark, so let's add some lights. I can go Shift A, go down here to light, and I'm going to add, there's 4 different kinds of lights. We're going to start things off with a sunlight, also known sometimes as a directional light. What this light does is essentially it shines light from in a direction. It doesn't matter where you place the light in the actual scene. It's shining it from infinitely one direction into infinitely another direction. So right now it's pointing straight down. That's pretty harsh lighting. I'm going to rotate it a little bit. Hold on, go back into wireframe mode here. I'm going to rotate it a little bit along like this, and then like so. So it's sort of pointing at an angle. And if it's helpful, you can even drag it up above your scene, like so. This isn't representative of where the sun actually is, but it helps. And so now we've got a bit of a more realistic shadow. Rotate it off like so. But that's still pretty harsh. You've got really bright shadows here and really dark ones down there. So let's go into the settings for the light down here, which is, again, it's in the properties menu. It's this little green light bulb here. And let's pull the strength down to 0.2, let's say. So that gives us sort of an ambient lighting, gives us an ambient shadow of the chair, but it's still pretty harsh. So let's add a little bit more of a natural light. And so for that, I recommend adding a area light. An area light is essentially shines light in a square area, or in our case, we can even make it in the settings here for the light, we can make it into a disc or a circle. I'm going to grab this light, pull it up, rotate it a little bit like that, grab it off, pull it off to the side like that, make sure it's pointing at our chair. I'm going to pull the size up a little bit, make it bigger, and I'm going to pull the power up too until it looks like it's lighting our scene. So that's about 100 watts. So now you can see that we do have this ambient sort of lighting of the sun, but we also have sort of like a point of interest light that sort of points at our object and sort of shows it. You can see there's some sort of crunchy artifacty stuff down here. I don't know if it shows up well on the Zoom, but that's the engine actually rendering in real time. The Blender default render engine is an engine called Eevee. It is a real-time rendering engine and it's phenomenal. It's super fast. It has great results in seconds. So I recommend most of the time when you're doing lighting in a scene, you want a directional light or a sunlight and some sort of area light pointing at your object. It gives the best natural feeling lighting for your scene. There are some other lights that we won't really go over. There's spotlight, which is similar to an area light, but it's a spotlight. You use it for, making something really stand out, or a point light. Point light is a single point in space that emanates light in a 360 degrees out from around it. I would use this for things like torches hanging on a wall or magic emanating from someone's hands or something like that, but I wouldn't use it for lighting my scene. You want to use an area light for lighting your scene in conjunction with a sunlight. Yeah, that's most of it. Like that's the crash coursiest lighting course you can get, but that's pretty much if you want simple but effective lighting, a sunlight and directional light. Bam, there we go, that's lighting. Cool. Last thing we're gonna take a look at before we think about actually rendering this and getting it into Unreal Engine is we're gonna talk about adding some color to this, adding some texture to this. So let's go, pull this down a little bit. Let's go into the last one we haven't explored here yet in Material Preview. So I'm going to click on Material Preview like that, and everything instantly goes white. What this is previewing is it's previewing how the color and material and texture that have been applied to your objects. So we haven't applied anything yet. You may have noticed that along the top here, we have all these little tabs, modeling, sculpturing, whatever. You can ignore pretty much all of these, but one that I like is shading. So we can click on shading. And it brings up a whole bunch of complex stuff, but really all that you need to care about that much is the 3D view here and the shader editor down here. Now, shading is an incredibly complex topic that has a lot of very big things involved in it, and we're not going to touch anything more than just simple color shading today. Things like adding metallic, stuff like that, we're going to touch on it a little bit, but we're really not going to do too much. There's a lot of very crazy things you can do with Blender shading, with nodes connected to nodes, and it can get really complex. But all we're going to be doing right now is mostly just adding some color. So let's make the seat of our chair here. I know the chairs in the space here are black, but we're going to make this one, I don't know, blue, let's say. So we can go down to this little ball here in the properties here. It's the materials tab. And with our object selected, with the back of our chair selected, we're going to click new. Give it a second as it adds the material in. New material. Let's call this material seat, or actually let's call it plastic. And we want the color to be blue. So let's click on the color. We can click on it here. We can also click on it in the shader editor here. So I'm going to click on it here. Go to blue. Give it some intensity like that. That's pretty cool. That's looking like a good color. And then we have sort of 4 properties underneath it. Again, shaders can get really, really, really complex. And generally, the professional way to do it is to use images called maps to sort of tell the computer where to put your reflection, where to put the metallicness of the object, where to put the alpha, stuff like that. We're going to do it all manually here with these sliders, but know that this is not the standard way to do it. This is just the fast, rapid way that we're going to do it because it's a super simple material. So we've got 4 things here. This is the way that materials are modeled in a lot of game engines and 3D platforms using a metallic, a roughness, a color, metallic, and a roughness, generally speaking. IOR you can ignore. It's really mostly for glass objects. Alpha you can ignore too. Alpha is just our transparency. Give it a second. It's rendering. Yeah, alphas are transparency. You can ignore it. Leave it on 1 for now. Mostly what we care about is metallic and roughness. So if, for example, we dragged metallic all the way up to 1, now it looks like this is made of like a blue metal or something like that. We don't really want that. We want it to be plastic, so we can leave metallic at 0. If we drag our roughness to 0, now it's a super shiny plastic chair. That's awesome. And that's starting to kind of look like plastic. We don't want to go all the way because then it almost looks like glass or something like that. So I'm going to do roughness at 0.2, let's say, maybe even 0.3. Now that chair has some shine to it, but the plastic has some shine to it, but it's not totally completely reflective. Again, you would model this through maps and images, but this is a pretty quick way to do it. Let's say we want the legs to also have a material. So let's select legs, hit new. Let's call this metal. And then we want our metallic for our legs to be 100. So now we've got some nice metallic legs. We want these to be a little bit shinier. So let's go to 0.3, just like the chair. And now we've got some shiny metallic legs. That's a pretty quick way to model a texture like that. If you're interested in learning more about texturing and shading, there are a bajillion tutorials on it, and it's a big, deep rabbit hole, and you can create some really cool stuff with it. Grass growing on stuff, and bumps, the texture looking all bumpy, and there's a million texture websites you can get textures from. So if you're interested in this, look more into it, but this is as far as we're gonna go for right now. So I'm gonna save my work. I'm gonna go back to layout, and I'm gonna go to rendered. So now you can see in rendered, those materials have sort of carried forward. Due to the fact that the chair is sort of overshadowing the legs, quite literally, we don't get that shine. So I kind of want that shine. So I'm going to grab this down and then rotate it a little bit. Just doing this sort of quickly. Kind of want to get some of, yeah, there we go. Kind of want to get some of the shine off those legs. By the way, if I don't want these giant lights in the way, I can click on this little button up here, the show overlays, and I can just click on that to hide it. I use that as sort of like a little preview for previewing when I'm doing lighting. So yeah, we can toggle that on and off. That looks pretty good. Again, we can get more finicky with this, but in the interest of time, we're just going to do it like that. There's a few more things that I want to address for us before we do any more. Before we start exporting this, we need to do something called unwrapping. So unwrapping is a sometimes confusing process for beginners that has to do with telling the computer how to wrap a texture around an object. This is more pertinent when you have a texture that actually has images on it, but we're going to do it here because it's a good practice. I'm going to go to the UV editing tab here. Go in and select my object like this. And what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to go back to the shading. Sorry, go back to the shading here. And I'm going to, for now, remove the plastic texture from the chair. I'm going to add a new one called checkerboard. Checkerboard. A checkerboard texture is used to model how a texture is going to sort of deform and wrap around an object. So I'm going to go Shift A to add a new node in here, an image texture. I'm going to connect that up to the base color here. I know that I might feel like I'm going a little bit fast. but all we're doing is just we're essentially saying feed an image into the color. Rather than it just being a solid color, we're feeding an image into it. In the little image editor in the bottom right here, I'm going to hit new. I'm going to call it checkerboard. I'm going to select the generated type to UV grid and hit new image. So what I did is I essentially, using Blender, I created a new image and that is now stored within Blender that has this sort of checkerboard look to it. I'm going to go back to my image texture here, select this little picture icon here and select checkerboard. And now that is feeding the checkerboard into the base color of the chair. That's as fancy as we're going to get for nodes for today. And so that sort of previews to us how our vertices wrap and warp and distort around our chair. Needless to say, this does not look great. This does not look very good. So I'm going to go back to UV editing here because it'll be easier to see. Go back to material preview. So what we want is we want the object here to unwrap in such a way that the checkerboard doesn't have any distortions. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to press U, unwrap. So that's looking a little bit better. But remember, this has to be in edit mode. So in edit mode, you press U and unwrap. This is looking better. You know, we've got actual checkerboard textures, but it's still pretty warped in there. We want this to be nice and flat and uniform generally. So we're going to be doing something called adding seams. Seams tells the computer where to sort of cut the texture to wrap it around the object. Think of it like if you were to make a cube out of paper, you make a sort of a T shape, and then you fold the sides in, and then the top, and then the top around. It's like you're wrapping a Christmas present. We want to tell it to wrap it in a particular way. So we're going to mark the seams, and generally we want to mark seams where they're not going to be seen. I'm going to hide the ground here. We want to mark some seams where they're not going to be seen, so that we don't, so that our users, or not our users, but the people viewing our model don't see the seams. So I'm going to select along the bottom here. Select this edge all the way around like that. I'm going to press spacebar, and then I'm going to type seam. I'm going to mark seam. So now you can see it has this sort of darker orange color, or actually red. That's our seam. So if we press A again and U unwrap, now we're getting somewhere. I mean, the middle is still a little messed up. So we're going to do a little bit more work. But you can see on the bottom, it's sort of unsightly. It doesn't look great. On the top, we're getting somewhere a little bit. I'm going to mark another seam here. Select all the vertices up along the back edge. Hit Q, not Q, spacebar, and mark seam. I can save this to my quick favorites as well. Select everything, U, unwrap. Now the front is looking pretty good. It's a little messy over here. And because of that, I might consider marking a seam somewhere in the middle here if it's still looking kind of gross. But for the most part, this is actually looking pretty good. When you look at it most of the time head on, it's going to look pretty nice when you have a texture wrapped around it. If you look at it from the back, it'll be a little ugly. But that's generally how we unwrap things. So unwrapping crash course. Yeah, unwrap, make sure that's all good. Okay, great. We're going to do it for the legs as well. So I'm going to select the legs, go to materials here, remove the metal, set it to checkerboard, and the legs have a checkerboard. So they're not looking too bad, but you can see the squares are a little stretched. So we want those to be a little bit more square-like. So I'm going to hit U, unwrap. They're still like that. I'm going to hold Alt, or in this case Control, and select, and it's going to select the full circle. I'm going to mark a seam there, because nobody's going to see it because it's on the floor. Hit U, unwrap, all that again. And let me hide the top of the chair here. I'm going to add another one along the top here. Oops. Mark seam, U, unwrap. Looking pretty well. Now they look sort of like barbershop poles. So I'm going to add one more final seam along the back here. U, unwrap. Oops. U, unwrap. There we go. Those are starting to look like good legs. So the reason that I hit a seam at the back here was that it can't unwrap the tube, because the tube is sort of, it's a tube wrapped around it. It needs to have a cut in it so that it can be nice and flat when laid out. Because if you look here, it's all laid it out nice and flat here. So that's why I added the seam there. Let's do Option H to bring all of our things back. And now our chair is nice and unwrapped. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to remove the checkerboard texture from the legs, put that back to metal, the top, put that back to plastic. Fantastic. Now we can go back to our layout here, and cool. That was unwrapping. Let's render a little image of this chair. We need to add a camera, so I'm going to go Shift A. Go down to camera here. So a camera is always added at the bottom, at the center here, in the middle. But we want it to be snapped to what we're seeing in the actual scene. So I can press 0, which will zoom me into my camera view here, but it's looking down the bottom of the scene. We don't really want that. So if you press N to bring up this panel on the right, go down to View, click on Camera to View, lock Camera to View. This will now lock our camera to our actual view in the scene. So if I scroll out, you can see the camera is actually moving with my view, and I can get that in place exactly how I want it. Maybe hide these again so that I can see. It's a nice little scene there. I got to remember to turn that back off. And now if I move again, I'm now independent from the camera, and I can just press 0 to go back to the camera or go back out. Look at that, we put a camera in the scene. So again, that's 0 to go to the camera, N, and then View, this little View tab, and lock camera to view or unlock camera from view. Great. Before we can render a scene, there's a few things we got to check in our quality settings. So again, on the right in properties, we can go to the render tab here. And really the only thing that you need to care about as a beginner is the samples. So our samples are set to 16, or sorry, in render, our samples are set to 64. You want your samples to be in powers of 2. So 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, and they go up in incremental properties. So 64 is good for a test render, so let's leave it at that for now. And there's pretty much nothing else you have to touch. There's some fancy settings you can do with the camera, with focal length and perspective. I'll let you guys futz with that on your own time. But really all we need to do is just set the samples. We can leave it at 64 for now. And all we have to do is go up to render, render image. Give it a second. And you can't see that, unfortunately. But if on your own screens you go up to render, render image, it'll render, you know what, actually, let me share my full screen with you all. There we go. Now you can see it has rendered an actual image. So I can go image and then save and send it to my friends and look at that. I made a chair in Blender. If I want it, but you can see if I scroll in here, it's not great quality, you know, and we've got some little gray, you know, dirt looking pixels down there. It's not looking great. So I can up my sample. So 64 times 2 is 128. So let's try save that. Render image. This will take a little bit longer, naturally. But you can see now, if I scroll in, the quality is a lot better. It doesn't really look like it, but it is theoretically better. Generally, if you want a crisp, clean image, you want to go up to 2048 about, and that you leave that to render, leave it for a couple hours, and it'll render a beautiful scene. If I hit render right now, it would crash, maybe might crash Blender, but I'm gonna leave it 128 for now. But if you want a nice, crisp, clear image, yeah, go to 2048 and render it for a couple hours. Great. The goal of workshops today is not necessarily though to render an image, it's to export our chair so that somebody opening it in Unreal Engine can actually use it. So let's talk about exporting. So I'm gonna go back to solid here, maybe material preview. Well, we can leave it unrendered, that's fine. And let's, hold on. Let me stop my share and share Blender again. Like so. There we go. Let me take a look at my notes here. Right. Okay. So when we're exporting to Unreal Engine, it's generally best practice for our objects to be joined as one. So right now we've got our chair and our legs that are separate objects. It's nice for the person who's working in Unreal to have them all in the same object. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new collection. So there's our collection here, which we're going to call, I don't know, meshes. I'll create a new one called export. And what I'll do is I'm going to, actually, I am going to go to material preview and I'm going to hide the lights for right now and the camera, and the floor even, so we know what we're dealing with here. Make sure all the transforms are applied to all these. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the legs and the seat, select both of them here, Command C to copy, go to export, Command V, and now we've got a duplicate of them. The reason I'm doing this is because we're going to join them together. That's quote unquote destructive. It'll mean that we're joining objects together, we're messing with things. We generally want, it's essentially, I'm just keeping a backup. So I'm going to hide those again. Let's show all these, but then hide the whole collection. I'm going to call this legs. Actually, we don't need to rename them yet because first of all, we need to join them, like I said. So select both of these. And I think I mentioned this before. It's Control J to join. But look at that. It had an error. And this is because we have our modifiers on here. So before we join them, I'm going to Command Z that, before we join them, these duplicated ones, let's apply their modifiers. So, and remember, we have to apply from the top to the bottom because the order of the modifiers matters. So I'm going to apply the mirror modifier, apply the subdivision modifier to the chair. And now you can see we've actually applied those changes to it. Go to the legs, do the same thing, apply the mirror modifier, apply the smoothing. Now it still looks the same, but all of the changes have been applied. Go back, select both of them, Control J, and now they are joined together. And I can rename this chair export. Voila. Lastly, though, because we join these two objects together, we are interfering with their UV unwrapping. So unfortunately, we have to go back to UV editing, select the whole chair, and you can see the UVs are now overlapping with each other. So I'm going to go with everything selected, U, unwrap, and now it's all nice and unwrapped. If, for example, I added the checkerboard texture to all this, it still looks good. In fact, it looks better than it was before. But I'm going to undo that and have those materials back on there. So now this is an object that has two materials on it at once, and all of our UVs are properly unwrapped. So that's great. Go back to the layout here, single object. There's a few fancy settings you can do with UV, like packing islands that optimizes size and stuff like that. We don't need to worry about that too much. That'll be in my document. Great. Last thing, do not forget, do not forget to apply transforms. Very important. And then all we have to do is go up to File, Export as FBX. And hold on, I'm going to share my whole screen again because a separate window popped up. Whole screen over here. So I went up to, with my object selected, I went up to File, Export, FBX. And then it brings up this window. It's going to call it workshop.fbx. Let's call it chair.fbx. And the only setting that you really need to care about is this top one here that says selected objects. You want that on. So this is so that it exports only the selected objects. It's not going to export, our lighting and our floor and our camera and all that stuff. It just exports the chair. And you can say, for example, you want to turn some settings off, and there's a whole bunch of fancy export settings here you really don't need to worry about. All you need to worry about is selected objects. And then you can hit export, and it's done. And you can send that FBX file to the person who's working on Unreal, or maybe it's yourself, and it will retain its materials, it'll retain its scale and size and everything like that. One more thing, if you find that you open it up in Unreal and the scale is way, way, way too big, we can look at the thing here, go to the item, and we can look at it. We can actually see our dimensions. Our chair is almost 2 meters wide. That feels a little big for our chair. So I'm going to hit S to scale our chair down. Let's make the width, I don't know, 0.5, 0.5 of a meter. Still a pretty big chair, but it'll be easier for our person working on Unreal to use it. And always apply the transforms so that our scale is 1, 1, 1. Then I can go File, Export, FBX, name it chair, selected objects, export, and we're done. And that is pretty much everything that I wanted to discuss today with Blender. We went through all the windows and what all the windows do. We went through creating, deleting, and moving around objects, modifying their scale and size. We went quite quickly through edit mode, and I talked about a lot of little tools and keyboard shortcuts that I use, all of which we'll have in a document that I'll put on the GAMERella website. And we sort of applied some of those skills to making a chair. We did some extruding for the chair. We did some mirror modifying. We applied the subdivision modifier, stuff like that. We also learned about rendering. We put our little scene together here. We put a little scene together and rendered a chair. We talked about UV unwrapping, how to make materials and apply them to objects, and then how to unwrap them properly and add seams. Adding seams is a delicate art of its own, and you won't get it on the first try, but you got to sort of wrap your head around it. And then we lastly talked about some settings for exporting as an FBX for Unreal. So later today, I'm going to send this actual model to my friend Leo, who's going to be taking over at 4 p.m. for the Unreal workshop. And he's going to be taking this model forward and teaching you guys all about Unreal. But that's it for me today. I think that we can end things here, but I'll be around for a few minutes still if anybody in the physical space wants to come up and ask me some one-on-one questions and work through things. But I think that that's it for me. And I hope that everyone has a good day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Owen. And thank you everyone for coming into Forest Space today to activate this conversation and this lovely workshop. For everyone online, you can feel free to stick in the Zoom for a few minutes to ask questions, but we're going to be closing up the live stream now. And just a quick reminder that this conversation is already available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit or share it. So as Owen mentioned, we have another GAMERella workshop coming up at 4. So feel free to join us for that. Thank you.